Jack Stevens had always felt a quiet satisfaction in the steady rhythm of farm life. The land he worked had been in his family for generations, fields of green stretching under the big sky, the smell of fresh earth after rain, and the hum of life that only a piece of land can offer. Jack loved his mornings, waking with the sun and tending to his crops. Nothing had changed for years. Life was predictable, peaceful, and comfortable. That is, until one fateful Tuesday morning when the first disruption came. A letter slipped through the slot of his front door. He was already halfway through his cup of coffee when he noticed the official-looking seal. Something about it made his stomach twist. The handwriting was sharp, formal, and impersonal, like it had been mass-printed for thousands of recipients. But Jack wasn't just anyone. He was a landowner, one of the few in the area who could trace his roots back more than 100 years. A letter like this wasn't normal. He tore it open, expecting something mundane, maybe an update on property taxes or some local ordinance. What he found, however, was far from ordinary. Dear Mr. Stevens, the Homeowners Association, HOA, has officially approved plans for the construction of a new $12 million shopping center in your neighborhood. This development includes your land as part of the project, as outlined in our land use documents. We understand this may be surprising, but please be assured that all legal requirements have been met. We will be in touch regarding compensation and next steps. Jack read the letter again, slowly, carefully. His mind couldn't quite make sense of it. His farmland was to be turned into a mall. His land. He had heard rumors about new developments in the area, but nothing like this. He didn't remember anyone mentioning anything about an actual mall, let alone having his own property swept up in the plans. His hand began to shake as he scanned the words again. There was no mistake, no misprint. His land, which had been passed down to him by his grandfather, was now a part of some huge construction project. But he hadn't signed anything. Jack hadn't agreed to anything. His land was his life, his family's legacy, and someone was taking it from him without so much as a discussion. A cold pit formed in his stomach. Something didn't sit right. He quickly grabbed the phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. The call connected with an automated message before transferring to a receptionist. Jack's voice tightened with frustration. "Hello, I just received a letter about a shopping mall. It says my property is part of the development plan. I'm confused. I haven't signed any agreements or given consent." The receptionist's voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Sir, the development has already been approved. The HOA has followed all legal protocols, and your land is part of the designated project area." "But," Jack's voice cracked, frustration creeping in, "I never agreed to this. There's no way my land is part of that project." "I understand your concerns, Mr. Stevens, but everything is in order. You'll receive information regarding compensation soon. Thank you for your understanding." Before Jack could respond, the line went dead. Compensation. The word lingered in his mind, like a cruel joke. What compensation could possibly replace his land, his heritage? Jack stood frozen in the doorway, staring out at the rolling fields. The wind whispered across the plains, but it no longer felt comforting. It felt cold, distant, as if the land itself was being taken away. His mind raced, and a single thought gnawed at him. What did I miss? The HOA had plans, and Jack had a feeling they weren't just taking his land. They were taking much more. Jack couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. The anger boiled in his chest, but it was tangled with a sharp feeling of dread. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. But where to turn? The HOA had spoken with such authority, like they knew everything, like they held all the cards. Determined, Jack grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. He wasn't about to let some faceless committee take his family's land without understanding exactly what was going on. The sun had barely risen, and the crisp morning air bit at his skin as he walked toward the HOA office. It wasn't far, just a short drive through the sleepy suburban streets. The HOA building was stark and sterile, a far cry from the homes Jack had known for years. It stood like a monument to modernity, its glass walls reflecting the morning light with an unsettling coldness. The place didn't look like it belonged in the small town Jack had grown up in. It looked more like a corporate headquarters, detached and imposing. Inside, the receptionist was quick to direct him to the boardroom, where the HOA's monthly meeting was being held. Jack had been to a few of these before, mostly small, harmless discussions about community events and rules. But today felt different. Today, he wasn't a member of the community. Today, he was an enemy. He walked into the room, and the chatter immediately fell silent. The room's occupants, 5 middle-aged men and women, all dressed in expensive suits and polished business attire, turned to look at him. They weren't the friendly neighbors he'd known for years. These were people who seemed like they belonged to a different world altogether, one of legal jargon and corporate power. Jack felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't let it show. He had come here for one thing: answers. "I just received this letter," Jack said, holding it up, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "I don't know how my property got tied into this mall development, but this is a mistake. I never signed anything. My family's land is not for sale." The board members exchanged looks, their faces neutral, almost rehearsed. Finally, the chairperson, a woman with icy eyes and a stern demeanor, spoke. "Mr. Stevens, we understand your concerns," she said, her tone smooth, practiced. "However, this development has been approved by both the HOA and the local government. We followed all legal procedures, and the planning stages have already begun. Your property is indeed part of the designated area." Jack's heart raced. "But I've never agreed to this. My family, this land, it's been in our name for generations. You can't just take it." The chairperson's gaze was unwavering. "We're not taking it, Mr. Stevens. We're compensating you fairly for it. You'll be offered a generous buyout package, and the land will be used for something that benefits the entire community. The mall will bring jobs, increased property values. This is progress." Jack's blood ran cold at the word compensation. That was the line they'd used in the letter, too. It didn't feel right. It felt empty. "I don't want compensation," Jack said, his voice growing firm. "I want my land. I want you to stop this. I want to know how this happened without my consent." The chairperson's smile was tight, but her voice remained calm. "Mr. Stevens, you've already been notified of the terms. The legal documentation is in place, and your land is legally part of the project. I'm afraid there's nothing more to discuss." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. "You think this is over? I'm not going to just sit here and let you bulldoze my farm, my family's legacy." The room's temperature seemed to drop as the board members exchanged quiet, knowing glances. The chairperson's voice softened, but the message was clear. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a takeover. "We suggest you accept the compensation offer, Mr. Stevens," she said, her voice now laced with something that bordered on condescension. "The plans are already moving forward. If you resist, there will be consequences." The words hung in the air like a silent threat. Jack's pulse quickened. He had never been good at playing games with people like this, people who used their power to push others around. But as the meeting ended, Jack knew one thing. They weren't just going to hand him his land back. The fight had only just begun, and he would need more than just a few words to stop the HOA from taking everything. Jack's mind raced as he left the HOA office. The chairperson's cold, dismissive attitude gnawed at him. Compensation. Generous offer. The words echoed in his head, but no matter how many times he replayed them, they didn't make sense. They didn't feel like a fair deal. They felt like an easy way to make him disappear, to sweep his concerns under the rug. He wasn't a man who took things lying down, not when it came to his land. That night, Jack sat at his kitchen table, staring at the letter again. His hands were clenched tight around the edges, as if holding on could somehow keep the truth from slipping through his fingers. How had they tied his land to this development? He hadn't signed a thing, agreed to a thing. There was no way it could be that simple. And yet, the HOA acted like they had everything locked down tight. In the morning, Jack made a decision. If he was going to get answers, he needed to go straight to the source, the legal documents that controlled his land. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew that whatever it was buried somewhere in the paperwork. Jack reached out to Jennifer Reed, a local lawyer who'd helped him with smaller matters in the past. Jennifer had always been sharp, meticulous in her work. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was her. She agreed to meet him later that afternoon at her office, a small, cozy place tucked away on the outskirts of town. As Jack walked through the door, he noticed her sharp eyes scanning him with an intensity that made him feel like she was already piecing together a puzzle. "So, what's going on?" Jennifer asked, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I got your message. A mall, your land." Jack sat down, his hands trembling slightly as he handed her the letter. "I don't know what's happening, Jennifer. The HOA says my land is part of a development project, a mall, but I never agreed to it. I don't remember signing anything, and they're already moving forward with the plans." Jennifer's expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she read the letter. Her eyes narrowed. This is odd. The HOA doesn't just claim land like that without some kind of legal backing. But this letter, it doesn't explain how they think they have the right to it. She paused, looking up from the letter and locking eyes with Jack. "We need to go over the property deeds. If there's a mistake or a clause buried in your family's history, we'll find it." Together, they combed through stacks of documents, tax records, and property deeds. Hours passed in silence, save for the rustling of paper and the occasional sigh. Jack grew restless as they sifted through page after page, but Jennifer didn't give up. Her eyes skimmed over details Jack would never have caught. There was a faint, almost imperceptible line on an old deed, a clause buried deep in the fine print that Jack's grandfather had signed off on decades ago. The clause, Jennifer explained, was a land use agreement that allowed for future developments in the area. Jack's grandfather had sold a portion of land to a developer in the 1960s under certain conditions, but there was a stipulation that could allow for future growth, meaning the land could be absorbed by larger developments if the area was rezoned or commercialized. "This was supposed to be a one-time deal," Jennifer said, her voice quiet. "But it looks like the HOA has exploited it. They're claiming your land because of this agreement. It's like a loophole they're using to legally justify taking your property." Jack felt a cold shiver creep down his spine. A loophole. A legal trap buried in the fine print of a contract his grandfather had signed without fully understanding what it meant. Jack had always thought his family's land was safe, protected. But this was a nightmare. "I never signed anything," Jack muttered, his fingers pressing hard against the table. "How can they do this? How is this even legal?" Jennifer's face softened with sympathy, but her eyes remained steely. "It's legal because of that clause. They twisted it into a way to claim your land. They have the legal right to seize it, but that doesn't mean it's right. We have to fight this, Jack. This is the moment we expose them." Jack leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The truth was clear now. The HOA wasn't just taking his land. They were playing a dangerous game of manipulation. They had found a hidden way to strip him of everything, and they weren't going to stop until they had it all. But Jack was no fool. If there was a way to fight back, he'd find it, and he would make sure the HOA paid for every underhanded move they'd made. Jack left Jennifer's office feeling a mix of fury and fear. The cold, impersonal legalese of the old contract had dug into his bones, but it was the malicious clarity of the HOA's manipulation that twisted his gut. His family's land, a place filled with generations of memories, was now just a line on a developer's map, a part of a plan he hadn't even been told about. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was desperate. But as he stared at the papers Jennifer had handed him, he realized something. They hadn't won yet. He still had a chance to stop them. He wasn't going to let them take everything his family had worked for, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. Jack needed to gather allies. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He wasn't the only one being targeted. The HOA had been running roughshod over the neighborhood for years, using their authority to push through development after development. There were other residents who had been affected by their manipulations, other homeowners who had unknowingly signed away their rights, or whose properties had been absorbed into the HOA's ever-expanding empire. Maybe they were just as desperate as he was. He started by visiting a few of his neighbors, longtime friends and fellow farmers who had seen the changes creeping into the community. They were suspicious of the HOA, too. It didn't take much to convince them to join him in fighting back. But the more Jack spoke to people, the more he realized that he wasn't the only one who had been kept in the dark. People were angry, but they were also afraid. The HOA had more power than Jack had ever realized, and they weren't shy about using it. Neighbors spoke of unexplained fines, sudden zoning changes, and development projects pushed through without community input. The HOA controlled everything from trash collection to neighborhood rules, and their grip seemed unshakable. Jack couldn't fight this battle alone. Not against an organization with the kind of resources and legal backing the HOA had. He needed a team, and he needed someone who understood the intricacies of power, who could strategize and push back against the creeping tide of bureaucracy. Someone like Jennifer, who had already proven she wasn't intimidated by the HOA's high-priced lawyers. But Jack knew they needed more than legal expertise. They needed people with a voice. People who had experienced the same kind of intimidation and manipulation from the HOA that Jack had. People who had been marginalized, pushed to the edge of their own neighborhoods. By the end of the week, Jack had begun organizing a meeting, an underground gathering of concerned homeowners and tenants who had fallen victim to the HOA's overreach. He would stand at the front and tell his story, but it wasn't just his fight anymore. He was going to bring them all into the fold. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jack felt his nerves tightening in his chest. The room was small, tucked away in the back of a diner that no one in the HOA would ever suspect. As people trickled in, Jack saw the same look in their eyes, a mixture of fear and determination. These weren't just his neighbors. They were people who had been silenced, ignored, or worse, people who were fighting for their right to stay in their homes, to protect the land their families had worked for. Jack took a deep breath as he stood at the front. The room fell silent. "I don't have to tell you that the HOA isn't just taking my land," Jack began, his voice calm but unwavering. "They're taking our homes, our future, and we've let them do it for too long. But we don't have to take this lying down. We have a voice, and we're going to make sure they hear us." The room was electric with tension. For the first time, Jack saw the spark of something bigger than just his own fight. This wasn't just about his family's land anymore. This was about something much larger: the community, the people, the power to stand up and say no. The meeting at the diner had ignited a fire within Jack. The energy in the room was palpable, every person there united by one common goal: to fight back against the HOA's iron grip on their community. They weren't just going to roll over and let their homes, their heritage, be wiped out by a development scheme that had already steamrolled through their lives. But as the meeting ended and people filtered out into the night, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA wasn't just a faceless organization. It was a beast, and it had sharp teeth. He had already felt their bite, and he wasn't the only one. He had seen it in the eyes of his neighbors. Fear, yes, but also a quiet resolve. They knew the stakes were high. If they didn't act fast, the HOA would strip them of everything. Jack's phone buzzed just as he was locking his car. He pulled it out, expecting a message from Jennifer, but it was an unknown number. He hesitated, but then answered. "Mr. Stevens, this is Clark Hamilton," a smooth, cold voice said on the other end. "I believe you're making quite a lot of noise about the development in your area. You've been speaking to some of our residents, I understand." Jack's pulse quickened. The HOA's lawyer, Clark Hamilton, was one of the most feared names in local real estate law. He was the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to get results. His words alone were enough to make people wither. "Look, I don't know who you think you are," Jack began, but Hamilton cut him off. "Let me make myself very clear, Mr. Stevens," Hamilton said, his voice icy. "You're creating unnecessary trouble. You've been given the offer, and you've been told the terms. If you don't comply, you'll be faced with legal consequences. This development is happening whether you like it or not. The HOA has the power to do what it needs to protect the interests of the community." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. "The community?" He spat. "You're taking my land for a mall, and you call that protecting the community. I'm not backing down. You can't just force people out like this." There was a long silence on the other end, and when Hamilton spoke again, his voice was even colder. "This is your final warning, Mr. Stevens. Don't push this any further. You'll regret it if you do." The line went dead. Jack stood there for a long moment, staring at the phone. He knew what that call was. A threat. A direct warning. But it didn't matter. He wasn't afraid anymore. The more the HOA pushed him, the more determined he became. If they wanted a fight, they would get one. But as the days passed, the pressure grew. His phone rang constantly with updates from his neighbors, strange notices, threats of fines, sudden inspections from the HOA. It was clear the board was tightening the screws, trying to intimidate him and the others into submission. But Jack's resolve never wavered. Then, one evening, as Jack was sitting at home, staring out over the land he'd worked so hard to protect, something else came. A package. It was plain and unmarked, left on his doorstep with no return address. Inside, Jack found a thick envelope containing a series of photos of his farm. But they weren't ordinary pictures. They showed his fields, his house, taken from strange angles that seemed to suggest someone had been watching him. Some of the photos were close-ups of the land. Others showed his home from a distance, almost as if they had been taken with a telephoto lens. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a warning. It was a message. The last photo was the most chilling of all. It was a shot of Jack standing at the edge of his property, taken from behind a fence. The image was blurry, but unmistakable. Someone had been watching him. Jack's mind raced. Was it the HOA? Or someone else? The photo hit Jack like a punch to the gut. The way it captured his every move, the unblinking lens that had followed him for days, sent a shiver of dread down his spine. Who had been watching him? And why? This wasn't just some random act of intimidation. It felt personal, like someone had been lying in wait, studying him, learning his routine. Jack's fingers trembled as he held the photo. The realization began to sink in. This wasn't about a mall or a development project anymore. It was something darker. The HOA had made it clear they were willing to use whatever means necessary to force him into submission. And if the photos were any indication, they weren't just using legal threats. They were watching him. And if they could watch him, they could do worse. Jack's mind raced as he tried to piece together what was happening. It wasn't just about his farm. It was about control. And the HOA was willing to take control of everything, by any means necessary. The thought made his blood run cold. Jennifer had warned him that the HOA would play dirty, but he hadn't realized just how far they were willing to go. They were already using legal loopholes to seize land. But now this. Surveillance. Jack couldn't shake the image of someone lurking in the shadows, observing his every move. It felt like the walls were closing in around him, and the paranoia began to creep in. Could he trust anyone? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Jack called Jennifer first thing the next morning. Her tone was cautious when she picked up. "Jack, what's going on?" "You sound different," she said, concern thick in her voice. "Jennifer," Jack said, his voice low, "I just got a package. Photos. Of my land, of me. Someone's been watching me." There was a brief silence on the other end before Jennifer responded, her voice sharp. "This is worse than I thought. They're escalating, Jack. This isn't just about intimidation anymore. This is about control. They're sending a message. Jack clenched his fists. I'm not backing down, but I need help, more than just legal help. If they're watching me, we need to find out who's behind it, and we need to find out fast. Jennifer's response was firm. We'll figure this out. I'll start looking into the HOA's board members, their connections. They're hiding something, and I know they won't stop until they get what they want. As the day wore on, Jack found himself even more on edge. Every creak of the floor, every passing car outside his window, made him jump. Was it them? Was someone lurking, waiting for him to slip up? His farm had always been his safe place, his sanctuary. Now it felt like a trap. By the time night fell, Jack was no closer to answers, but he knew one thing for certain. The HOA wasn't just interested in building a mall anymore. They'd wanted something bigger, something that extended far beyond the land they were seizing. The next morning, Jack's phone rang again, but this time, it wasn't Jennifer. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was Clark Hamilton, the HOA's lawyer. Mr. Stevens, Hamilton's voice slid through the phone, as smooth and menacing as ever. I trust you received the photos. I must admit, we didn't expect you to be so resistant. But you need to understand something. You're in no position to fight this. The land is ours now, and if you continue to resist, things will only get worse. Jack's stomach tightened. He wanted to scream at Hamilton, to tell him he would never give in. But something about Hamilton's calm tone made him hesitate. Do you think I'll just walk away from this? Jack shot back, his voice tight with anger. I'm not leaving without a fight. Hamilton's laughter echoed in the silence before he spoke again, his words laced with something darker. You've made your choice. Now, Mr. Stevens, we'll see how far you're willing to go to keep it. The line went dead. Jack stared at his phone, his heart pounding in his chest. That was it. He'd crossed a line. The HOA wasn't just trying to scare him anymore. They were preparing for war. And whatever game they were playing, it wasn't just about a mall. It was about power. Jack knew he was now in the crosshairs, but he wouldn't back down. No matter what Hamilton or anyone else threw his way, Jack would fight to the end. The question now was, how far would they go? The silence after Hamilton's call was deafening. Jack stood in the middle of his kitchen, the phone still pressed to his ear, his mind spinning with the weight of what had just happened. His heart thudded heavily in his chest. This wasn't just some bureaucratic battle over land anymore. This was a war, one that the HOA was fighting with every tool at its disposal. But even as fear threatened to take hold, Jack's resolve hardened. He wouldn't back down. He couldn't. His family had owned this land for generations. It was more than just soil and property. It was his legacy. And no matter how far the HOA was willing to go, Jack wasn't going to let them take that from him. His phone buzzed again, and Jack didn't even need to look at the screen to know who it was. Jennifer's name flashed, and he answered it immediately. Jack, I've been digging into the HOA's board members. Jennifer's voice was low, serious. There's something you need to know. Someone on the inside might be willing to help you. Jack's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Who? I can't say yet. It's someone close to the board, someone who's fed up with how the HOA has been running things. They don't want to see this go any further, but they need your trust. This is risky, but it might be your only shot to stop this. Jack's mind raced. An ally on the inside. This could change everything. Tell me more. Jennifer hesitated. I don't have all the details, but they've promised to give you critical information. I'll set up a meeting. It's going to be in a secure location, so you can't afford to trust just anyone right now. Jack didn't need any more convincing. If there was a way to take down the HOA from the inside, he had to find out what it was. His gut told him this was his chance to turn the tables. But as the conversation ended, a dark thought crept into his mind. How could he be sure he could trust this mysterious source? That evening, Jack made his way to the location Jennifer had arranged. It was a small, run-down diner on the outskirts of town, its neon sign flickering in the dying light of the evening. He parked his truck in the lot, scanning the area for anything out of place. As he entered the diner, the smell of old coffee and greasy food hit him. The place was nearly empty, save for a few scattered patrons. Jennifer was already there, sitting in a booth in the far corner, looking around nervously. Jack slid into the seat across from her. "Who's this person?" he asked quietly. Jennifer looked around, lowering her voice. "His name is Frank Reynolds. He's a former board member who recently resigned. He didn't agree with how the HOA has been operating, and he's seen enough to know they're hiding something big. He's the one who contacted me." Jack leaned in closer. "What exactly does he know?" Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "I don't know all the details yet, but he has access to the HOA's private files, things that they're keeping hidden from the public. He claims they've been skimming money from development projects and covering up illegal zoning changes." Jack's blood ran cold. This was more than just land grabs and shady deals. This was corruption. The HOA wasn't just targeting his farm. They were siphoning money, using their power to benefit a select few at the expense of everyone else. The door to the diner opened with a creak, and a man in his late 40s entered. He wore a weathered jacket, and his eyes darted nervously around the room before settling on Jack and Jennifer. He looked like someone who had spent years keeping secrets. His face was lined with stress, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes. This was Frank Reynolds. Jennifer gestured subtly to the man, and Jack rose to meet him. Frank's handshake was firm, but his grip betrayed a hint of anxiety. "Mr. Stevens," Frank said, his voice low and urgent, "I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to help you stop what's coming. But this is going to get dangerous, and I need to know if you're really ready to fight back." Jack's heart raced as he looked Frank in the eyes. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. "Tell me what you know." Frank slid a thick folder across the table. It was filled with documents, copies of zoning reports, contracts, and emails that painted a clear picture of the HOA's illegal activities. The more Jack scanned through the papers, the more his anger grew. It was all there, the proof he'd been looking for. The HOA had been manipulating zoning laws, funneling funds into their own pockets, and using their power to push through developments that were harming the community. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," Frank whispered. "But if you want to take them down, you need to move fast. They're not going to sit idly by and let you expose them. And if they find out I'm the one helping you, they'll come after me too." The weight of the documents in Jack's hands felt heavier than it had any right to. As Frank leaned back in his seat, his eyes flickering nervously toward the door, Jack knew the stakes had escalated. What he held in those papers wasn't just evidence. It was a death sentence for the HOA's unchecked reign over the community. If he exposed them, the battle would be over. But if he failed, they would crush him under their power. Jack's fingers gripped the folder tightly, the harsh fluorescent lights above buzzing, adding a sense of unease to the already thick atmosphere. He wasn't just fighting for his land anymore. He was fighting for the entire neighborhood, for every person who had suffered at the HOA's hands, and for every farmer who'd watched as their lands were slowly consumed by the faceless greed of developers. Jennifer leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've got the proof now, Jack. But exposing this is dangerous. They'll stop at nothing to protect themselves. You have to be ready for everything." Jack nodded slowly, the fire of resolve burning in his chest. He had to expose the truth. There was no other option. As he glanced down at the documents, one line stood out to him. It was a reference to a secretive meeting, the HOA's top executives discussing a final phase of development, which wasn't just about a mall. It was about turning his entire neighborhood into a corporate playground, pushing out anyone who couldn't afford to stay. Jack's blood boiled. This wasn't just about land. It was about eliminating everything that made this place a home. "Do you have a plan?" Frank asked, breaking Jack's reverie. "They're watching." They know I'm helping you. It's only a matter of time before they come for me too." Jack looked at the former board member with a steady gaze. "I've got a plan. We take the fight to the people. We expose them publicly, and we take away their power before they can crush us." Jennifer's eyes widened. "You're talking about a public reveal?" Jack nodded. "Yes. We'll release everything. Documents, photos, everything that proves their corruption. If we make it public, they won't be able to hide." There was a brief pause as Frank processed the plan. Then he exhaled slowly. "It's risky, but it's the only way." Jack stood, his mind already calculating the next steps. "We'll need to go straight to the press. Get a reliable journalist who can get the story out. Someone the HOA can't intimidate. We'll flood social media with the truth. It'll be their worst nightmare." Jennifer gave a sharp nod. "I know just the person. She's been investigating the HOA for months. We'll make sure they can't spin this." But as the plan took shape, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The closer they got to exposing the truth, the more dangerous things seemed to get. The HOA wouldn't let this slide without retaliation, and they had the resources to make it a nightmare. Jack walked out of the diner with the documents in hand, the weight of what they were about to do pressing heavily on his shoulders. It was one thing to fight for your land. It was another to take down a machine this powerful. And though Jack had always prided himself on being a man of principle, he knew this fight would cost more than he could imagine. As he got into his truck, a dark realization began to creep into his mind. They weren't just up against the HOA anymore. They were up against an entire network, a force that would stop at nothing to protect its interests. That night, Jack barely slept. Every creak of the house, every passing car outside his window, made him jump. His instincts told him they were being watched, maybe even followed. The world outside had become a dangerous place, but he pushed the fear away, focusing on the task at hand. The next morning, Jennifer called him. "We've got the journalist. She's in. We're going to live with the story today." Jack took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. As the hours ticked by, Jack could feel the walls closing in. They were being hunted by the HOA's lawyers, their private investigators, anyone they could send to crush this movement. And just as they prepared to release everything to the press, Jack's phone buzzed with an anonymous text. "You've made a dangerous mistake. You don't know what you're up against. You'll regret this." Jack's hand tightened around the phone. The fight had only just begun. But the twist was clear now. There was someone in the shadows pulling the strings, someone who wasn't just content with ruining him. They wanted to destroy everything he had fought for. As Jack turned his phone off and stepped out into the daylight, he knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just a fight for land. It was a battle for survival. And if he didn't expose the HOA now, they'd bury him and everyone else with their greed.